Good evening and welcome to today's City Council study session here in the City of Moreno Valley Community Services District, City as successor agency for the Community Redevelopment Agency of the City of Moreno Valley Housing Authority, Moreno Valley Public Financing Authority, and the Board of Library Trustees. The City Council receives a separate stipend for CSD meetings. I now call this meeting to order on February 13th, 2024 at 6:02 p.m. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by, would anyone like to volunteer to do the pledge?
I'll do it.
The pledge will be led by Councilman Delgado, and we don't have an invocation for tonight.
Please join me by placing your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember. That brings us next to roll call. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Baca Santa Cruz?
Here.
Councilmember Delgado?
Here, ma'am.
Councilmember Marcus?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bernard?
Here.
And Mayor Cabrera.
Here. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Staff introductions, please.
Jane Halstead, City Clerk.
Patty Rodriguez, Senior Deputy City Clerk.
Steve Quintanilla, City Attorney.
Mike Lee, City Manager.
Brian Mohan, Assistant City Manager, Administration.
Sean Kelleher, Acting Assistant City Manager Acting Assistant City Manager Development, Community Development Director. I will get it one day.
Lana Jimenez, Chief Financial Officer, City Treasurer.
Melissa Walker, Director of Public Works.
Jeremy Bubnick, Director of Parks and Community Services.
Robert Cardenas, Human Resources Director.
Cruz Esparza, Director, Economic Development and Housing.
Lieutenant Tim Browse for Captain Ken Reichel, Chief of Police.
And Jesse Park, Fire Chief.
Good evening, everyone. I think you made everyone after you a little nervous there, but it happens to the best of us. Thank you so much, staff. Pursuant to the Brown Act, public comments shall be limited to only those items on this study session agenda. Each person shall be allowed a total of 3 minutes to comment on each item on this agenda. A reminder that the city is currently offering Spanish translation services if anyone is interested in this feature. La ciudad actualmente ofrece servicios de traducción al español. Si alguien está interesado, por favor, nos avisan. Finally, in order to preserve the meeting decorum, council and staff will not respond during public comment. Madam Clerk, are there any requests to speak?
There are no requests to speak, Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With that, we'll go ahead and move into Section A, which is business. We have 2 items. The first is the Riverside County Transportation Commission, and we'll start off with a report from Public Works.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening we have a report on the 2024 Draft Traffic Relief Plan from RCTC, and if Aaron Hake will please take the stand and we'll get your presentation up. Thank you.
Good evening, welcome.
All right, good evening, Honorable Mayor, Honorable City Council members, city staff, and residents of Moreno Valley. My name is Aaron Hake. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Riverside County Transportation Commission, which represents all of you and all residents of Riverside County when it comes to regional transportation planning, funding, and related matters. And tonight we're excited to talk to you and the public about the draft 2024 Traffic Relief Plan that RCTC has put out for public circulation and comment. And we're very interested in receiving the council's feedback tonight on this plan. I'll talk a little bit about what it is, why it's important, where we're going with it, and we'll just kind of take it from there. So first, I wanted to provide an introduction to who RCTC is. It's a government agency not everyone may be familiar with, but we're created by state law, but we're a regional agency. Every city in Riverside County has a seat on our board. We have 32 elected officials on our board, plus a representative of the governor. And actually, the mayor is the commissioner for the city of Moreno Valley. You're also represented by your county supervisor on our board, as well as the city gets to appoint an alternate. And so it's a large body of elected officials that get to come together and decide on regional transportation funding and planning issues. We deliver projects, but one of the most important things that we do is we administer Measure A, which is a voter-approved half-cent sales tax that the voters of Riverside County have authorized first in 1988, and then they renewed it again in 2002, and that measure extends all the way to 2039. Our agency is the conduit for state and federal funding for many transportation projects, everything from public transportation to highways, active transportation, which is bicycle and pedestrian funds that come from the state and federal government, and other regional funds. We also recently constructed express lanes on the State Route 91 and Interstate 15. Just to the west of here. We operate those express lanes, we financed them, and you can set up a transponder account with us to take those facilities. And so that's one of the roles that we play for you and for the residents of this county. So we are your team when it comes to transportation investments. Here on the screen are just a sampling of all the things that we have invested in. I had my team go back and look at all of the investments we've made in the city of Moreno Valley since 2010. And so just going back to 2010, RCTC has invested over $92 million in projects within the city of Moreno Valley, whether that's through Measure A or other state and federal funds. And we've invested in $387 million of regional transportation projects that have benefited the city of Moreno Valley. One that may come to mind at the top of our minds is the recent project that completed in the Badlands on State Route 60, where we added a truck lane and smoothed out some of the curves and just made that a safer ride. So we do all sorts of projects. We've put funding on interchanges. Again, we fund RTA, highways. The Metrolink station at Marchfield Moreno Valley Station is owned by RCTC. We own and operate that station, as well as 8 others within western Riverside County, and we also help fund the Metrolink service that serves this region going into LA, San Bernardino, Orange counties, and beyond. So that all being said, we do a lot, but we know that there's more to do. We did a public survey of Riverside County residents last year and asked them what is important to them when it comes to transportation. And here you can see that on the top of people's minds is keeping roads in good condition, reducing traffic, improving safety, keeping fares, transit fares low for seniors, students, disabled persons, and it's flashing a lot on my screen, but and veterans. And so what we've done over the last several years, in addition to that survey, is we've been doing extensive public outreach. It's going on today, and it's part of why I'm here tonight, to ask residents of the county, cities that are a part of RCTC, and other stakeholders, what is your vision for the future? We started this process prior to the pandemic, and traffic was pretty bad. People were telling us it's pretty bad, and our commissioners were telling us we needed to do something and take action to address the significant challenges this region has as we grow. The pandemic happened, and so we kind of put a pause on efforts. As you recall, there was no traffic for some time, and we all realized what it's like when everybody stays home. But we're back. Traffic is back, and the perception that we have and what we're hearing from our jurisdictions is that traffic is now worse than it was before. You know, just to get here tonight from downtown Riverside was about a 9-mile drive. It took me 35 minutes. And that's just me tonight, but we know that residents of this county experience that every day, and it's to get to their jobs, it's to get to school, it's to get to essential services, and it's to get to things that make life matter. And their commute is much longer than what I experienced. And so what we've done is put a plan together to try to address those challenges. And that's what the traffic relief plan is. What's important to note, though, the traffic relief plan, which is at your dais today, and we have copies here for members of the public, and I'll show the folks watching online how they can see it, is to note that all the things in this plan are not funded. These are things we want to do. These are our aspirations. We don't have the money to deliver them, but we need to start with what we want to do, and then we'll talk about how we get to funding it. And so within the plan, we created investment categories. We know there are many types of transportation, whether it's highways, public transit, commuter assistance. You may have noticed that we have tow trucks on the freeway. They're those white tow trucks. They have a little blue circle and a yellow triangle in the middle. It's called Freeway Service Patrol, and that's an RCTC service. That's funded by Measure A. It's on the 215, it's on the 60, and it's during peak hours, and it's to help you get off the freeway if you're in an accident or if your car breaks down, to keep traffic moving, but also to get you to safety, where then you can call your insurance company or AAA. But we have services like that. And so we've put together a comprehensive plan with these investment categories, and you here see a map that's way zoomed out, but of the many improvements that are included within the plan, whether it's rail, bus, freeway service patrol, interchanges, highways, and regional connections. I won't mention every project in the plan. There are many. I just wanted to highlight a few that are relevant to the city of Moreno Valley. In the highways category, we are proposing adding at least one lane on Interstate 215 from the 60 down to Van Buren Boulevard, reconstructing the interchange at State Route 60 and Redlands Boulevard here in the city, as well as adding a lane on the 60 throughout the city. For our Safe Streets and Roads investment, something that has been brought up to us many times by stakeholders is concerns about safety on some of our major corridors. One of those is Gilman Springs Road. I don't need to tell you how dangerous that road can be and the high number of fatalities we have. The County of Riverside is working on improvements there, but we certainly need to provide funding to build those ultimate improvements. We're also focusing on rail, increasing service throughout the county for rail service. Although it doesn't touch this city specifically, we are working on providing daily rail service to the Coachella Valley. Today there is no alternative to Interstate 10 to driving. And the residents and the businesses of Coachella Valley have been seeking for a long time to have a rail service that extends to them, that connects them to the rest of Southern California. We're also looking at extending Metrolink service, which today comes down the I-215. I'm sure you've seen the train running up and down. It terminates in South Paris today, but RCTC actually owns the rail line that goes to Hemet and San Jacinto from there. And we'd like to extend service all the way to Hemet and San Jacinto so that folks that live in that valley can take the train up here to Paris, to Moreno Valley, Riverside, and beyond. We're also proposing regional connections, such as improving the Cajalco Road corridor, realigning State Route 79 in the San Jacinto Valley, as well as putting investments into active transportation on your local city streets so that people can bike or walk more safely around their communities. I also want to note, I've talked about commuter assistance, but also the need to invest in environmental mitigation. So many of these projects do have impacts on the environment, and in order to get them approved by the various agencies that need to approve them, and to make sure that we are accounting for all of the impacts of these projects, we do need to provide mitigation funding. And so what we've included in this plan is ensuring that we will have the ability to provide that mitigation so those projects can move forward. We have some statutory responsibility built into what RCTC does, and it's built into this plan, that should the plan go forward, should the projects be funded, which I'll talk about in a minute, that we ensure that there are independent audits and reviews, that the money is being spent how it's supposed to be spent, and that the money is staying local. We're going to talk about in a minute that the way to raise money for this is through a local measure, and it's important to note if we did that, the money would not be able to be sent to Sacramento or Washington, D.C. The legislature can't touch it. We also have in our statutes that any measure that RCTC puts forward can put no more than 1% to administrative salaries and benefits. This is important so that taxpayers know that if they're providing funding to us, that 99% of those funds are actually going to the projects and programs they voted to approve. And then again, just built into how we operate, cities and counties have to work together. All of your neighbor jurisdictions have a seat at the table. The county has a seat at the table. And we're a consensus-driven regional body. Yes, we're looking out for what goes on in individual cities, but we're looking at the region as a whole and how is it that we can solve the challenges that cross jurisdictional lines. So, as I started with, these projects and services aren't funded. And if we're going to fund it, what we have the authority to do by way of the state legislature is to propose to the voters a sales tax measure. We have up to a 1 cent capacity. We can propose to the voters a 1% sales tax in addition to Measure A, and that is what the Commission is considering putting forward on this November's ballot as a means to fund the traffic relief plan. Should that measure go forward, and if the voters approved it, The estimated investment from that measure over the course of 30 years, countywide, is $25 billion. It would support approximately 168,000 jobs. Again, I should mention these figures were put together by Beacon Economics, which is an economics firm that has done RCTC's economic forecasting for decades, and they've been pretty accurate. So the measure would support approximately 168,000 jobs, support approximately $11 billion in workforce income over that 30 years, and generate an economic output of approximately $31 billion. Here in western Riverside County, that amount would be about $20 billion raised over 30 years. Now, proposing any sort of funding measure requires public support. And so in that survey I talked about at the beginning, we asked point blank to voters, would you support a sales tax measure to fund the transportation needs in this county? And 67% of the voters in that survey said yes. This is a countywide figure. In this area alone, these cities of Moreno Valley, Paris, and the surrounding communities, that number was even higher than the countywide total. It was 76%. And then when we asked generically, do you just perceive, as you're driving around, do you perceive that there's a need for more funding for transportation projects? 82% of voters in Riverside County say yes, they see a need for more funding. So, that all being said, we took all the feedback we've heard over the last few years, we put this plan together, and we have it out available for your comment, for your constituents' comment, and here's how they can participate and how you can participate. Anyone watching can hold their phone up to the screen, scan that QR code with your camera. It will take you right to the traffic relief plan, or you can go to trafficreliefplan.org. You can visit us there on the link. You can also email us. You can contact us on social media. We have a very easy to use comment form on the website. We've received comments that are one sentence. We've received paragraphs. And we've received comments from a lot of people that are very interested in better ways to move around, comments on what they think we should include. Ultimately, what we're hearing, just in general, if I can describe it, is people are saying, yes, do these things and do more. We're not getting requests to do less or to cut things. We're getting requests to, that's not enough. We're eager to be out talking about this, and I'll go ahead and conclude there and would love the council's feedback.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate the report there. Thank you for sharing that information and for joining us here this evening. So at this time, I do want to turn this up to the dais and open the floor to any council questions for Aaron or for staff if desired. And first up, I see Councilman Delgado.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Thank you, Aaron, for that presentation. I just have a couple of quick questions. Will the lane, I know this is a down the road want in our area based on some monies coming in, but will the lane going through the 60 be a toll road or will it be a freeway?
Yeah, so that's not determined yet. There has not been a study to initiate that project yet. Really, it's a line on the map at this point. It's an expressed desire we've heard from the community and previously from the city. The determination of what that would be subject to a study that would evaluate all different alternatives, and that would be a public process.
Oh, cool. And then for the Measure A monies that we're getting now, how do you guys determine prioritizing which cities out of the 32 joining cities, who gets what?
Great question. So in Measure A today, in the Western County where we are, 29% of the funds go directly back to the cities and the county, and that's written in the ordinance. The voters approved that allocation, and the monies are distributed by a formula that's set in the ordinance, and it's divided by population and by taxable sales. It's a combination of those two factors. And every month, RCTC cuts a check to the city of Moreno Valley for however that formula computes with what your population is and what your taxable sales are. So that goes to the city for use in your capital improvement plan, and the city has pretty broad discretion on how it spends those funds. We also provide funding through other competitive processes. We just finished one for regional arterial projects. There are other competitive processes at the state and federal level we assist the city with. But the main thing is the local streets and roads. That's a set formula. Everyone gets their fair share every month.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Aaron.
Hi.
I sit on the board of directors for RTA, and my question is this. 82% of the county voters more needs for transportation. You know, RTA has been, their ridership has grown since the pandemic, and they give out many free incentives or free rides, 25 cents rides, you know, to the voters, to the public. What does RCTC do for RTA when it comes to funding for those types of incentives or those type of offers?
Yeah, several things. First of all, we have a great relationship with RTA, and our CEO, Ann Mayer, and Kristen Wardzinski, their CEO, work hand in hand on programs and how to sort of strategize to get these types of programs out to the public. We have a process by which RTA can request funds for the things that they need, and that goes through the RCTC Commission to approve on an annual basis. We're just kicking off that process right now. So it's really a matter of RTA coming to us saying, hey, we have this idea. What do you think? Maybe we have the funding for it, or maybe we can help out with a grant proposal to some other agency that we think is a good fit to bring other people's money to the table to spend less of our own. So it really is on a case-by-case basis of what grant programs are out there. We're always looking for those opportunities.
Another question. The interchange 215, 60 going, people say going north or 60 west, that interchange. The problem that I see that we're having there, and you probably are aware of it, is coming out the 215 onto the 60. It goes from 3 lanes into the 60 215. Those big trucks coming off the 215, they take up 3 lanes of the 91 and that interchange. Is there any plans to do something, to reroute, or how are we going to correct that problem? And I've been asked that many times.
You're talking about at the west end near downtown Riverside, or are you talking about here in the city?
Here in Moville.
This part, well, you know, it's a tight fit. It's a really tight fit, and I don't know the solution today, sir. I do know that with the improvements that were made several years ago, there is a truck bypass going in one direction. We don't have it in the other. But we have a capacity constraint there. But that's something we would look at. Today, we don't even have the funding to look at it. And so that's about all I can tell you is we would love to be able to find a way to address it, but it's going to be really, really tight.
Yeah, we should get the CHP out there to monitor those trucks so they won't take all 3 lanes going downhill. Does RCTC have any involvement in paving of the 215?
No, that's a Caltrans responsibility. Are you referring to the area south of here on the way to Paris?
Yeah.
The washboard? Yeah.
We have no say so with other Caltrans.
You know, that's something we voiced to Caltrans. It came up when I spoke to the Paris City Council a couple of weeks ago. I do understand they do have a rehabilitation project in the works, but it's not going to be ready for a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
But they are working on it. It's not our jurisdiction, but we certainly raise those issues to them.
Right. Okay, and one more.
Okay, sure.
One more question.
Yeah.
On your toll roads, the 91 on the 15, it's when you're going west on the 91 on the toll roads, you got a price.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into Orange County, that's not the same price. And sometimes that price is cut in half when you get into Orange County. Why is that? When this flow of traffic is going down there, why is it the price differences?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So on the 91 express lanes, there are, if you're coming from this area and you're going west on the 91, you have the option to get in at about McKinley Street before you get to the 15, and then there's an opportunity at the county line either to stay in the express lanes or to get out. And so the price you're seeing on the sign at McKinley is the price to just take the segment from the 15 to the county line. And the segment in Orange County is another price, and that's based on historical traffic volumes, and it's really priced to manage the demand. What we see is, depending on the commute pattern of that day and that time of day and that day of the week, there are different levels of demand for each of those segments. And so they're priced according to whatever the demand is for that facility to keep traffic flowing. So it may be at certain times the Riverside County segment has higher demand, so the price will be higher, and the Orange County segment has lower demand, so the price will be lower, or vice versa. So that's why you see different price.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I don't see any other hands at the moment. I do have a couple questions for you as well. First one is kind of a more general question, but based on your experience and you being the subject matter expert and RCTC as well, when it comes to these infrastructure improvements, whether it's rail or adding bus routes or adding a lane, whether it's free or a toll lane or an express lane, what does the data show and what do studies show that actually improves congestion and reduces congestion? And because, and this is, I ask this to make sure that the public is kind of up to date on this, because it might be easy for us as policymakers to say, hey, we want another lane on the 60, and it may be reasonable to believe that that would help, but I know sometimes it doesn't help. So is there anything you could share as far as what type of improvements actually do have a significant impact in improving that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and what you're really getting to is the nuance of transportation policy and why this challenge is so difficult. There is no one solution for every transportation problem. In many cases, adding a lane may help. In many cases, adding a lane may not do anything at all. And in some cases, all we need is an operational improvement where I have my team here, Eric Galloway from our project delivery department, and Atalia Garcia, our community engagement manager. They're working on a project in Temecula where we're coordinating the ramp meters with new technology we're installing on the freeway. We're not going to add any pavement to the freeway, but what we're adding in is detectors on the freeway that will monitor in real time how the traffic is moving, and that will determine how many cars get on the freeway at once so that the traffic keeps flowing at a much less cost than spending hundreds of millions of dollars to add pavement to a freeway. And we can do it in much less time. We're going to go to construction this year. So there are cases in a county growing like ours where hundreds of thousands of people are moving here, where a project like the Mid-County Parkway that connects the 215 to the Hemet-Sinisino Valley is necessary because there's no freeway access there. Those residents have to drive local roads to get anywhere. But in cases out here, where, as we talked about on the 60, it's so congested, what are things we can do to improve the operation of how the system actually works to make it more efficient at a lower cost makes more sense. And in some cases, it's using things like the express lanes. We may want to look at, do express lanes work in this area? Where what you're doing is you may be adding a lane or taking the carpool lane and turning it into an express lane that doesn't get used all the time, and allowing more cars to use it, and making sure that when you make that improvement, it's durable. It's that you drive in that lane, you're going to go 60 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour instead of that unpredictability. So it just depends on the situation.
Thank you, and I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of making sure that in a hypothetical world where there is funding available, right, that we're not just spending it on things that we think will improve congestion, that we actually look at the data and make those empirically supported decisions to spend taxpayer dollars wisely. So thank you for that. And on a similar note, the toll roads and the express lanes, as has been mentioned before, that are already there heading toward Corona and in that area. Since those have been put in place, what does the data show in those areas? Has traffic actually improved in those areas?
We're moving more cars today than we did before. And the data does show that we've been able to reduce congestion in many parts of the day from what it was. It's allowing a lot of travel time certainty. When we opened the 91 express lanes and we didn't have a connection to the 15 going to the north, the number one complaint we got from the public is, why didn't you build a connection to the 15? People want to use it, and I've received a lot of comments from people that, this is anecdotal, you spoke to data, but we do have the data that shows that we move more people, but what we're hearing is that people are saying, don't take that away. That's something I rely on for my commute. We're also, the data will show that we have a RTA bus route, Route 200, that has performed extraordinarily well, that uses those express lanes. For $3, somebody can go from downtown San Bernardino to downtown Riverside, get on either of those places, and go in the 91 express lanes to Orange County instead of driving or paying the toll, whatever that is. It's been a hugely successful route for RTA. So the data shows that's worked as well.
Thank you. And just, I think, 2 more questions. The Coachella Valley Rail is something that was mentioned in the traffic relief plan as it stands right now. If again, assuming that the funding is there and the CVAG rail, it gets included and built, would that be using existing rail infrastructure and upgrading it and improving it to allow for passenger rail, or would this be laying a new track and creating a whole new rail system out to Coachella?
Yeah, great question. So today, rail in Southern California exists on shared tracks with freight railroads. RCTC does own the tracks down the 215, but that Coachella Valley Rail project would run on BNSF track from LA out to Colton, and then from Colton east it would run on Union Pacific tracks. What our initial environmental studies have shown is that from Colton out to Coachella, we would need to build a 3rd mainline track on the Union Pacific right-of-way. So it would be part of their facility, but we would have access to it to run those passenger trains. And that's another project Mr. Galloway is helping us deliver. It's going to take a lot of coordination with the freight railroad and others.
Got it. And I think I'll hit the pause button there.
Okay.
That's all the questions I have. So thank you. Next up, we have Mayor Pro Tem Bernard.
Hello.
Hi.
So you said that essentially you're saying that if the voters don't approve this, that they can't expect to have any of their other projects that they're looking forward to, that we would just basically be doing maintenance on roads?
We would be able to do what's in existing Measure A today, and that's a pretty limited list of projects. The city would continue to receive its Measure A funds, as I described earlier, through 2039. The public transit funds in Measure A would continue to flow through 2039. So we would be limited to whatever was in that measure until 2039.
Okay. And then this measure would go until what year?
That has not been determined yet by the commission. In the figures I showed you, Mayor Pro Tem, we just modeled it out for 30 years just as a reference point.
And much like the mayor, I do have some questions regarding some of the flow lanes and the traffic lanes. Why have we not explored looking at change of flow traffic lanes like they have back east, depending on how traffic is flowing, being able to flip the lanes in the middle, in the center, so that you can alleviate some of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We refer to those as reversible lanes here in California, and there are some of those in San Diego on I-15. And you know what, there is a state law or a regulation. Eric, we have to look at that, don't we? We haven't looked at, I'll check on that for you, but I think there's a requirement for some sources of funding that we have to at least explore that option. What I will say is that in this area in particular, the congestion is so heavy in both directions that it's usually not a good idea to restrict traffic on one side, because you're going to be creating more congestion on that side. If we had a situation where there was hardly any traffic and going in that direction, and in the non-peak hour, it might make sense. But what we see is the volumes are so high all day long, it may not be advisable. But it is something that we do consider and look at. It's just not always feasible. It's a great question.
That's all I have here.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And one last one, I had it written down, and Mayor Pro Tem kind of brought it up. Measure A. You clarified that as of now will go through 2039, but right now we know that over the past few years, and it looks like this will continue, there's a big push to reduce VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and the state isn't really looking at funding any new freeway expansions or anything like that. So could you share anything in regards to, as we continue this trend, how that will affect Measure A and what revenues are collected, and then what effects that might have?
That's a great question. So Measure A was written in 2002. And at that time, the leaders of this county, did their best, as we're doing today, to foresee what the needs of the growing county would be decades into the future. And they named certain highway projects, widening State Route 91, widening the 15, widening the 215. Those were kind of the basic things that needed to get done when the county was at that level of growth. And what we're seeing today is a demand for going beyond that into more public transportation, in funding more active transportation, funding projects that will mitigate those major highway projects. The fact of the matter is we're still a growing county and we will still need roads, but we now know better what those needs are, and using a plan that was adopted by the voters in 2002 doesn't speak to all the needs we know exist today. So yes, we're having to look at reducing vehicle miles traveled. Measure A doesn't contemplate that. So we're trying to create a tool that does. Last thing I'll say on this, the state and federal government are very interested in transportation funding. Most of it's focused on public transportation. Most of it's focused on things that aren't traditional highways. And so it's important to us, if we want to pull more state and federal funding in here, we need to have the match. And that's something we've heard loud and clear from the U.S. Department of Transportation and our partners at Caltrans is, we'll give you money if you have the match. And we have jurisdictions to the west of us that have a lot more funding. LA Metro has multiple measures for transportation. They have significant match to put on the table, and they are very competitive for those dollars. So we're trying to up our game in some respects.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Are there any further questions from the council?
If I may, Mayor, I thought of one more thing. May I throw? I know you want to move on, but Councilmember Delgado asked a question about prioritizing, and I just want to let the council know that there may be projects that are not directly in this city or in some of your neighbors' areas that are designed to improve the overall system. And we recognize that a traveler coming through the city may not live here, and vice versa. And so when we look at the projects on the map, we're encouraging the public to look at the big picture, not just what is it within this boundary, but what is it that affects the commute. We talked about Corona, we talked about the Badlands, we talked about Coachella Valley. So when we're prioritizing, we're trying to look at that bigger regional picture. And I just really appreciate the thoughtful, extensive dialogue tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you once again, Aaron. Really appreciate you and your colleagues for coming out tonight, and we'll definitely continue the communication.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good night.
And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our second item on the agenda, which is campaign-related regulations. And I see our city attorney coming up here to the microphone. Mr. City Attorney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. It's nice to be over here. Well, this might not be as exciting as traffic, so I'll see what I can do. But as you know, this year's a big year. We're having a huge general election, not only here in the city of Moreno Valley, but here in our state of California, and we have our federal election coming up. So I anticipate there's going to be a plethora of campaign signs out there. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about campaign signs. What I'm not going to talk about tonight is I'm not going to talk about reporting your campaign contributions or any candidates' filings you have to do or any general conflicts of interest issues. Those are all a whole different topic. I'm just going to focus on these campaign-related regulations that you guys will, some of you, the candidates, whoever they are going to have to deal with at some point during the campaign. And so the issues I'm going to cover pertain to use of public resources for campaign purposes, the use of city employees or non-use of city employees, on soliciting campaign funds through using city resources, using your position as an elected official to influence any staff people to vote for you or to not vote for somebody, making promises to employees and other city officials in exchange for their support for your campaign. There are various laws dealing with mass mailings and what we can and can't do within 60 days of an election. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, including Sean's favorite topic over in community development, campaign signs and campaign materials. We're also going to talk a little bit about the use of public facilities for soliciting campaign contributions, for posting signs, for distributing pamphlets. And finally, we're going to end this discussion with the new conflict of interest laws dealing specifically with campaign contributions. So I'll try to make this as exciting as possible. No guarantees. You might think the traffic discussion was a lot better than this one. So let's begin. Oh, I'm one of those people who can't chew gum and talk at the same time. So as I was going through all these Supreme Court cases to get some guidance on what to speak about tonight, I was trying to come up with probably, what I thought was the best quote from a Supreme Court case that clearly articulated what this issue is all about. And I really couldn't find anything because a lot of those opinions are very convoluted. So I looked at a number of opinions and I kind of condensed them and came up with this. I paraphrased these several opinions. So campaign regulations are all about striking a balance between the personal rights of city officials and city employees and the interests of the voters and taxpayers, all of whom are entitled to a fair election process that's free of undue influence when the public positions are used, your public positions are used as a bully pulpit. So they actually use that term, bully pulpit. And I see that term used a lot in the Supreme Court cases when they talk about political campaigning. So let's begin with what you may not use using public resources or public funds. And public resources consist of all the equipment, all the supplies we have at City Hall. Doesn't really matter what it is. Photocopy machines, we don't have faxes anymore, I don't think. Computers, printers, other equipment. You cannot use those to make campaign material. I mean, that sounds so obvious. But if you take a look at some of the FPPC, the Fair Political Practices Commission opinions, you'll see, oh my God, they are using photocopiers, they are using fax machines, they are using printers to produce this campaign material. I thought, well, I guess they weren't told. And the thing to keep in mind, and I'm just going to talk about this just briefly, is that the FPPC has fines that they impose, and sometimes that fine could be 3 times the amount of the cost of whatever you used to produce campaign material. I am aware that somebody was fined $30,000 for producing 30,000 flyers after midnight, and they got caught. City telephones, city email, you can't use these for making political cold calls, for organizing, for communicating your personal views about another candidate. So this is not all about promoting yourself as a candidate, but it's also promoting or opposing another candidate. Office space, you know, it's sometimes really difficult for elected officials to come into their office and, you know, somebody gives them a phone call. What do you do? Is it from my child? No, you can take that phone call. There's nothing wrong with that. But is it for a political purpose? Now that may cross the line on the rule that allows you to use your telephone here at City Hall for personal purposes, such as talking to your child, talking to your spouse, talking to your child's teacher. If it's political, that's a red line. So obviously you can't use your office space for organizing events, preparing campaign ads, or holding campaign meetings. You may not use any office supplies, staples, pens, paper clips. It doesn't matter what the cost is. If you're using those supplies for political purposes, it's illegal. City's website, city's social media, this really applies to staff. We cannot take instructions from any candidate to post anything about them that is positive and related to their campaign. We cannot use any social media sites where the city is the administrator of the social media sites. Well, Councilmember Delgado mentioned that one of the things that he learned at the league conference he just attended was, oh my God, don't use social media. That's a whole different area of regulations, whole entirely different area of regulations that deal primarily, the concern there is with the Brown Act. Here, the concern is with using any social media where the city is an administrator for any campaign purposes. Staff time. Now, we have staff, all the staff here is here to serve the public and to serve the council through the city manager and the department directors. Sometimes, and I'm not saying it happens here, I've seen it in other agencies, we'll have a council member who's a candidate for office who innocently will ask a staff person, to set something up or to give me a photo. That photo that you took of me when I was out there, looking at a public works project. Can I have a copy of that photo? The person spending the time looking for that photo is technically violating the law. The laws that pertain to this prohibition against engaging in campaign activities while working at City Hall. The instructions that are being given by the candidate is also illegal. So it's really critical that whenever you have, run into a staff person in the hall or in the elevator and you engage in discussion with that particular staff person, it's very critical that you separate in your mind and in your discussion anything about your campaign. Did I miss something here? No. Okay. Employee uniforms. The general law, and this is out of the California Government Code, is that, I don't know why this is going off. Touching something?
Yeah, I think it's just something happening on the media side. I don't think it's anything you're doing.
Oh, okay. Employee uniforms. Now, I'm going to exclude police and fire because we contract with them. But we do have some employees that routinely wear uniforms, particularly our code compliance officers. It's critical that they do not wear their uniforms to any campaign-related events. Now I want to get into this issue regarding soliciting campaign contributions. Now, the city has lots of address lists. We have email addresses, we have mailing addresses, and those email addresses and those mailing addresses are deemed to be confidential, meaning that if somebody submits a request for this information through the Public Records Act, which is a state law governing the production of public records at the request of anybody, we cannot release address lists or anything that the public is not entitled to. The only time that the council, any member of the council, is entitled to something, a record or a document that the public is not entitled to, is determined by whether or not that document pertains or is germane to your duties as an elected official for the city. But during campaign season, when we get these requests for address lists, they become suspect. So anytime somebody asks for a list of addresses, whether it's email addresses or mailing addresses during the campaign season, it's likely that you're going to be denied that list, even though you may think that that address list is important to your role or your duties as an elected official for the city. So no solicitation of campaign contributions using anything that gets to City Hall. Mass mailings. What's a mass mailing? I think we need to talk about that. A mass mailing is actually a physical document, a piece of paper that's sent, that's actually mailed out to mailing it to specific addresses. And it's considered to be a mass mailing if we send 200 or more of those. So the city is authorized to send out mailings as long as, physical mailings to specific addresses, as long as there's no more than 200 of those. And that in those mass mailings, we can include references to particular individuals, on the council, and include signatures and photographs. All that changes, though, when we get to within 60 days of an election, and we'll talk about that shortly. So obviously, we can't use phone banks that are, city phone banks. Now, here's a really awkward situation that's created a lot, because a lot of staff people tend to be intimidated by all of you. Because you got elected by the residents of the community, and so they know you have a lot of support behind you. And so oftentimes, if you'll be walking down the hall and you may mention something like, "Oh God, I'm thirsty," it's likely somebody's going to run and get you a glass of water or a bottle of water. So the point is that sometimes we will, you can find yourself in a position where you're innocently using your position to influence a staff person. No matter how much you may think a particular employee is a friend of yours or a supporter of yours, you cannot use your official position here as an elected official to take advantage of that friendship or that support to solicit any sort of political activities in your favor or in opposition to one of your opposition candidates. So you got to be really careful about that. Now, I'd also like to point out, you'll see references here to the government code. You may see some references here to Fair Political Practices Commission regulations. So just for the benefit of the public, those are actually state laws and state regulations that set forth these regulations we're talking about now. So a lot of what I'm talking about is not what you should do or should not do, but basically it's what you can do and what you cannot do. And it's based on a lot of it's in the government code, a lot of it's in the California Elections Code, a lot of it's in the Political Reform Act, and we find them in the Fair Political Practice Commission regulations. And in addition to those rules and regulations and laws, We find a lot of this information, the guidance and restrictions and regulations in the context of court law opinions, case opinions. So that's where a lot of this comes from. So again, you can't use your official position to try to persuade or induce a city employee to take any form of political action. So this goes beyond just your particular candidacy. It also applies to ballot measures. Like for instance, if RCTC, if that gets on the ballot, a lot of these rules will apply to that particular ballot measure. You also can't make promises to city employees or prospective city employees by, for instance, saying, hey, you support my campaign, I'll get you hired. I'll go talk to the city manager and insist that the city manager hire you. That's a no-no. Salaries, you cannot promise anyone to increase their salary, and this includes making a promise to an association of employees that if you get their support, you're going to support in the next labor negotiations an increase in their compensation. You cannot promise anyone a gift in exchange for their support of your candidacy or for their opposition to one of your opposition candidates. You can't promise to throw them a party, if they promise to contribute to your campaign. Now, a lot of these things sound very obvious, and a lot of them you might think, oh God, who would ever do that? These are coming from case law. This stuff's from case law. There's a reason why a lot of these rules were adopted by the state legislature, because these situations actually occurred, and they continue to occur. And if you don't believe me, monitor those FPPC opinions. Okay, back to mass mailings. So we talked about mass mailings and what a mass mailing is, and that's 200 pieces of something tangible that's sent to a particular address. And there's 200 or more of them. Well, under this government code section, we can't send anything out. We can't send a letter out to the public that includes the name of any candidate, the photograph of any candidate, the signature of any candidate. Even if we include a photograph of all of your colleagues in that letter or that mass mailing, we get within that 60-day period, that's all cut off. And this is actually fair. This is relatively a new law. So we talked about signatures. We can't even make a reference to a candidate within 60 days in any mailings that we send out from City Hall. Even if we send out meeting announcements, we can't mention your name. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't see some of these outreach community events that you guys, like your little town halls that you do. We don't see those. We don't want those 60 days within the upcoming election. That will put staff in a very awkward situation in trying to set something like that up when we can't use your name, we can't use your photograph, can't use your signature, we can't do anything to feature you. So if you were to have an event like that, you're pretty much on your own. So, this is probably a message for the public, why you don't see any of the candidates out there doing any of these community events within 60 days of an election. Business cards, we cannot distribute business cards on your behalf. So if somebody comes into City Hall and asks for your business card and you're a candidate and we're within 60 days of an election, we cannot provide them with that business card. You can, we can't. We talked about event announcements and business cards. Oh, so here's the question that folks in planning, code compliance, city clerk, my office, and even the city manager gets every election season. Where can I distribute my campaign materials? You know, where can I distribute flyers? Where can I distribute buttons? Where can I distribute campaign pins? And I always found the better question is asked, where can't I distribute these materials? And so when we ask that question, where you can't distribute campaign materials, the law requires us to conduct this public forum analysis. What's a public forum analysis? It's basically all about what is the purpose of the place where this candidate wants to distribute campaign materials. So for instance, City Hall, no. Because the purpose of City Hall is to conduct city business. So anywhere within the confines of City Hall, within these walls, no campaign materials can be distributed or may be distributed. It's against the law. And that's because its purpose here, particularly in these council chambers, I think I have one here, is that the purpose of this council chamber is to conduct peaceful, tranquil discussion of city business. So let's look at other facilities. You know, the amphitheater. The amphitheater is for public entertainment, not for campaigning, not engaging in any other kind of free speech. And I'm talking about the inside of the amphitheater. The library, it's a quiet place for public to engage in library activities. The Civic Center parking lot is for parking and for movement of vehicles. And all of our recreational facilities are for recreation. So when the question is asked, where can I distribute campaign material, we're always going to look at the purpose of the facility or the area the candidate wants to distribute that material. Okay. Oh. I got that. So where? Public sidewalks. Supreme Court and every other court in this country has designated public sidewalks as an appropriate forum or venue to distribute campaign material. Why? Because public sidewalks are meant for the public to congregate, and we have no restrictions on our public side. I mean, the purpose of public sidewalks is just to move about. It does not make any legal sense to restrict what is discussed on a public sidewalk, meaning we are not regulating the speech on public sidewalks. Public walkways to city facilities, we mentioned the amphitheater. Oftentimes I get phone calls about or asking, well, can't I distribute this material, buttons within the facility? No. But you can distribute those materials at the entrance to the amphitheater. Just like here, we can prohibit the distribution of campaign materials within here, within the lobby, because that's for people to go in and out of this council chamber, but we can't outside in that area out there, the walkway, the gathering place. So as long as they're not impeding any pedestrian traffic in or out of this facility, and as long as they're not engaged in any activities that disrupts our meeting, such as using blowhorns, they have the right to go out there, hold a press conference, distribute materials, sign petitions, any campaign activities like that, as long as it doesn't disturb the business that's being conducted in this particular room, and not endanger, create public safety hazards. Now let's talk about campaign signs. So most cities, well, I would say all cities have sign regulations. But one of the big mistakes that a lot of cities have made in putting together their sign regulations is that they've carved out regulations for political signs. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has been all over the place on political campaign signs and where political campaign signs can be erected or installed or affixed to. And so now it's gotten to the point where political campaign signs are entitled to the best of the regulations, sign regulations, because political speech is probably one of the most coveted rights that we have in the United States of America. And we're moving further and further in that direction. So we can, though, cities can limit the posting of campaign signs in certain areas, as long as those requirements or the restrictions or those prohibitions apply to all similar types of signs, regardless of the content of that sign. Whether it's a yard sale sign, whether it's a real estate sign, or a campaign sign. If we give certain rights and privileges to yard sale signs and real estate signs, that same level of privileges and rights must be extended to political campaign signs. So that's created a real challenge for cities to come up with political campaign sign regulations without saying political campaign signs that will pass constitutional muster with our federal courts. But it's clear that we can prohibit, and this is what we do prohibit this. These are actually from our regulations. We can prohibit signs being placed on any of our, any city building, any city structure, city benches, picnic tables, public restrooms, on city vehicles. But when we look at when a city looks at its regulations for campaign signs, it's clear cut that we can prohibit the place, and we don't say can't put campaign signs here. We say you can't put these temporary signs there, regardless whether it's a yard sale sign or a real estate sign. We cannot carve out campaign signs and say only campaign signs can't be posted here or there. So when a court looks at a set of campaign sign regulations, and they see any reference to political signs or campaign signs, all of a sudden it becomes constitutionally suspect, meaning that, there must be something wrong here because the city appears to be controlling, regulating signs based on the content of the speech that appears on that sign. Why do they have signs, regulations that deal specifically for political campaign signs that are more restrictive than yard sale signs? Political campaign signs is considered to be pure political speech, whereas yard sale signs are considered to be commercial speech. The law generally it does favor political speech over commercial speech. So what the courts do is they look at political campaign signs from a First Amendment perspective. So they're analyzing all of these regulations dealing with signs in the context of the First Amendment to our Constitution. And keep in mind, it's the courts that interpret that law. That's why the law on campaign signs and a whole variety of issues will change as a generation of our Supreme Court justices change. And so just keep that in mind. What I may say today is the law based on a U.S. Supreme Court case. It may not be the law this coming summer. Things may totally change on political campaign signs. But the courts will also look to see that the campaign regulations are content neutral. Again, cities and counties may regulate signs as long as it's not based on the content of the message that's on the sign. There are some exceptions, though, when we deal with commercial speech amongst commercial speech regulations. But when we're dealing commercial speech and political speech, that political speech is entitled to just as many of the privileges and rights that are provided to to commercial speech, with some exceptions. And those exceptions include these, what we call time, place, and manner regulations. So when we're regulating signs, whether they're a political sign or a commercial sign, we can impose restrictions that control the timing, and we'll talk about the 90-day issue, the place where they're put, and the manner in which that speech is expressed. So basically, the courts have acknowledged that it's constitutionally okay to make candidates remove their signs within 10 days after an election, because the political speech there that's to be protected has already been protected. We already had the election. So there's really no genuine interest in keeping up that political sign from a First Amendment perspective after the election. It's before the election. So City of Moreno Valley, along with literally hundreds of other cities, have had, and I would probably say thousands of cities throughout the United States, had a regulation that prohibited campaign signs from being placed or installed, set up, put somewhere within 90 days of an election. Well, that was true and that was constitutional a few years ago, but it's no longer constitutional. But as I've taken a closer look at this, I realized that all those cities that got challenged had a separate provision in their code that provided that campaign signs cannot be put up 90 days before an election. So what you're going to see, what I'm going to propose soon is a revision, when I'm working with staff, is a revision to your regulations that pertain to campaign signs. And I believe that if we provide that temporary signs that are advertising an event, a legally scheduled event, and it applies across the board, whether it's a yard sale, whether it's a bankruptcy sale, or whether it applies to political signs, we may be able to require them to remove that sign or not put that sign up any earlier than 90 days from that scheduled event. So again, the problem that a lot of cities ran into is that they only had that rule for political campaign signs. So that's in the works. But again, you're probably thinking, Steve, I don't care about all of that stuff. I just want to know when I can put my campaign signs up and when I have to take them down and how large can they be. It's acting like my computer. Here, come on. Oh, wrong button. Okay, time, place, and manner regulations. So we're going to talk specifically about our municipal code. So this is a case that came out of the city of Antioch, and so the court there, this was a federal court, ruled that their regulation that prohibited signs from being placed 60 days before an election was unconstitutional. Well, everybody else had 90 days, so we know, oh, we got to make that change. So instead, what we've done here, like a lot of other cities have done, is that we just do not enforce that particular provision. But again, I'm working on a draft ordinance that I think we're going to get us around this issue because we won't restrict it to just political campaign signs. Now, the requirement that you remove your signs within 10 days after the election, that's part of our municipal code. That is currently constitutional. Okay, oh, there you go. Can't place campaign signs on, you can't place any sign on anybody's private property without their consent. So when I get a call or code compliance gets a call from somebody complaining about signs being on somebody else's property, it's like, hey, that's not our issue. As long as they don't have the area of all those signs don't exceed 80 square feet, they're okay. We have to presume that, you know, these people got permission from the landlord. We're not, you know, we're not in the business of enforcing private disputes over trespass, because there's a remedy for that, you know, that the property owner can go out there and just remove the sign. We can't place signs on any of our public buildings, or trees or shrubs, or any public street that's used for traffic or parking. But we allow them to be, we permit them in other public rights of way. So the law provides that we have to provide some sort of alternative means for political candidates to put up signs on public property. And generally, the place where we have to permit signs are in the parkways, in the parkways that run parallel to our rights of ways, whether it's a sidewalk or a street. So any of those, and it doesn't have to, it could be landscape or, you know, bare ground, but that's an area that government has to allow the placement of political campaign signs along with the other types of signs, unless it creates a traffic safety hazard. So under our municipal code, these are, you know, like I refer to these all as time, place, and manner regulations. They can't deface public property, they can't endanger public safety, they can't obscure the view of fire hydrants, street signs, traffic devices. Can't, you know, you can't place them in front of city signs or any place where it blocks the lines of sight to traffic. So anybody who's thinking about running for office, pay attention to this part. Okay. Oh. Okay, these are some manner restrictions. Can't have a sign that exceeds 32 square feet. That sounds like a big sign. Can't have a sign that exceeds 6 feet in height. Can't artificially light them. And you can't have an aggregate surface area of signs that exceed 80 square feet on a parcel or a lot, residential lot. Okay. Oh, here's the fun one. Now, you may recall earlier last year we talked about this new law that is referred to as the Levine Act. And, you know, just for members of the public who are curious about why we name these laws, you know, these laws are generally named after the assembly person or the state senator who basically came up with the idea and introduced the legislation. So if their version is adopted, it's typically named after them, like the Brown Act was named after an assembly person. In any event, the Levine Act, this law was a law that's been on the books for years, except it only applied to appointed officials. So it applied basically to all of our commission members, but it did not apply to the elected officials. And I always thought when I used to do the ethics training that this law is going to be changed someday. Well, it took them like 20 years to actually change it. And so essentially what the state legislature did is that it took this law that applied to appointed officials and extended it to elected officials, but they made it a lot stricter. So as you may recall, this law took effect, the effective date, the official effective date was July 1st, 2023. So because of the way it was written, it would apply to all the campaign contributions that were received to, you know, $250 or more that were received in the year 2023. Well, the FPPC fortunately took a case in December before January 1st, 2023 that held that this law doesn't apply to any campaign contributions received in the year 2023. But now this issue may come up a lot of cities. So here's the general rule. And what's complicated about this is that we have no case law whatsoever that provides us with any guidance on how to interpret or apply this law. And what makes it also complicated is that it doesn't just apply to the elected official, it applies to the applicants. And it goes as far as applying to members of the public who support or oppose a particular project. That's going to be the challenge. That's where I predict where the first cases are going to come from. It's like members of the public can create a conflict for the city council. And so that's going to be challenging. So whenever we have an applicant, whether it's a contract, whether it's a development entitlement or some sort of license, anything they want to get from the city council, if that applicant has provided a campaign contribution to anyone on the dais within the last 12 months that exceeded $250, they have to disclose that. So they disclose it, that's going to exclude whoever they gave the money to. So they have an obligation to announce that. It also prohibits the applicants from making any contributions or even offering to make contributions exceeding $250 or more 12 months following the decision. So before, there was absolutely no conflict, no technical legal conflict if you received a campaign contribution from an applicant within the last 12 months. None, zero. Wasn't considered to be a potential conflict of interest. Now it is. So we go back 12 months and, to determine whether or not, and I should point this, one thing I should point, it's not our obligation, it's not staff's obligation to disclose or to do the research to find out whether or not you received a campaign contribution in the last 12 months. That's your obligation. And so you would know that by looking at your 460 forms. That's the one, Jane, that they report campaign contributions. You guys have access to those. You can look at those. I think it's critical that you do look at those when some of these projects come through, because a lot of times you'll get a campaign contribution, or sometimes you'll get a campaign contribution from someone who's actually on a board, or is one of the silent partners, or who's a member of a limited liability company that is actually the applicant. So we got to be really careful about that too. So it's all, I believe it's probably a good thing whenever you receive receive a contribution exceeding $250, ask them. So what sort of interest do you have in the city? Are you planning on doing any development? Or if you don't ask them, you don't have to vote on their project. But it's very important to remember to inquire about these campaign contributors who give you $250 or more about their association and their interests in the city. Okay, the Levine Act applies to city council members. So if you received, and here's a really difficult thing. If you receive $250 or more within the 12 months before the decision, you have an obligation to disclose that. And the law says that if you receive that campaign contribution from the applicant or the applicant's representatives, you have an obligation to disclose and recuse yourself. So that, again, that's why it's critical that you ask and inquire, what is your interest in the community? Are you planning on coming before us to seek a license or some sort of entitlement or a contract? Because if you do, I will be precluded, I will have to publicly disclose it, and I will be precluded from voting on your contract or your project. And this all has to be announced for the record, which means it's going to be in the minutes. Now, there's an out here. So if somebody gave you a campaign contribution in the last 29 days or within 30 days of the decision, and you give that money back, then you don't have to, you can vote. You don't have to recuse yourself. Am I pointing this at the right thing? I guess. Okay. So that's the previous 12 months. Now, you can't solicit a campaign contribution of more than $250 12 months after the proceeding. So once you vote on that, don't count on any campaign contributions from that applicant. If you receive, if you receive a campaign contribution exceeding $250 and you return it within 14 days, then you're fine. Okay. Oh, there you go. Now here again is the difficult part of this whole law. It applies again to the elected official, applies to the applicant's representatives, and participants. Now what the heck is a participant? When we saw that word used, we thought, oh my goodness. We know who the applicant is. We know who the council member is, and we may know who some of the representatives are, but who in the heck is going to know who the participants are until they get up here and comment? So a participant can be a member of the public who's not an applicant, who's not an applicant's representative, who stands up here and says, I don't want that. I don't want you to approve that project. If that person gave you $250 or more in campaign contributions, you're out. You can't participate. Whether they oppose it or support it, you are out. They can still come up and express themselves and exercise their First Amendment rights, but you're out. So that brings us to that once again should be a reminder that if you get a campaign contribution of $250 or more from anyone in the community, you might want to go as far as asking, not only are you interested in projects, are you not interested in certain projects? Because we have certain projects that come up that we can predict who's going to come up here and support them and oppose them. I think that you're also in that position of knowing that as well. So if you get a campaign contribution or offered a campaign contribution, $250 or more, I think it's incumbent upon you to inquire, why are you giving this to me? What is your interest in the community? Are you planning, do you oppose these kind of projects, support these kind of projects? Because if you do, I'm out. So if we have a participant, a member of the public who has a business that's going to be impacted by a particular project, and they gave money, they gave $250 or more to you, you're out. So I think the best way of thinking about this is just, you get $250 or more from anyone, you should always inquire about what their interest is in the community and give them fair warning that if an issue comes up concerning any of their interests, you will have to disclose that and recuse yourself from participating in that particular item. So basically all the participants' financial interests, relate to whether or not the applicant was a source of income for the participant, whether the applicant gave a gift to the participant. That's how you establish the connection. So I can tell you this is going to create a lot it's already created a lot of confusion. And I predict that these are going to be the first cases coming out of the Levine Act. It's my understanding that the Levine Act is being looked at right now for amendments, and I'm hoping that one of the amendments is going to get rid of the participant or remove them from the law. So here's the conclusion. So I was trying to, again, look for, oh my God, let me find a great quote, from all these court cases, and I couldn't find anything. So I just stole all this stuff, I took all this stuff out of all these different case laws. And so my quote is, it's all about protecting the taxpayer's investment in public property and resources, respecting the rights of city staff, and protecting the integrity of local elections, which all builds trust and confidence in local government. So it's basically the same quote that I opened up with. So that concludes this really exciting discussion. Sorry, I couldn't include traffic, but anyways, if I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. City Attorney. I appreciate that presentation. That was exciting, and I think most of us probably recognize that name there on that last slide. So I'll turn over to the council for questions. First up, we have Councilman Delgado.
I just want to say thanks, Steve. This is the really good reminders and good information to keep us out of trouble. So I think I told you guys that a long time ago. I think your job is to keep us out of trouble, and by this presentation, you're helping keeping us out of trouble. So we appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I'm actually trying to give you information so you know how to keep yourself out of trouble.
Why you gotta put it back on me? Thank you. Yeah.
You say you're a troublemaker.
Next up, Councilmember Santa Cruz.
Steve, I have a couple of questions. You spoke about photos that we've taken in the city. What if they were a long time ago? Like you said, the
it doesn't matter. If you are sitting on that dais, and it's 60 days before the election, we can't include that old photo of you.
Okay.
Even if you weren't a council member or elected official at that time.
At that time. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you mentioned this in your presentation, not really a question, but I'm glad that you mentioned you'll be coming back with some recommendations to clean up some of our city laws and ordinances to make sure that we're in compliance with state and federal laws and regulations as well. So I'm glad that we're doing that. And again, just want to thank you for the presentation tonight.
You're welcome.
Okay, and unless there are any further questions or comments from the dais, I don't see any at this time. The next item on the agenda is adjournment. So we will go ahead and adjourn tonight's study session meeting at 7:35 p.m. Have a good night.
Painless.